Okay, great. And now we're going to start the live. So last week we had Scott Cooper of Sweet Water Grass Fat and Meats on to talk about, there it is, to talk about grass fat and meat and sustainable agriculture and the new methods that farmers can use. In the previous week, we had Dr. Cheney talking about, his new book. Mm-hmm. And then tomorrow, Donna, about an exercise program and a little bit about that. And then we're going to have Dr. Cash talk about Lyme disease and how to choose a natural path. So I'm hoping that you, Debbie, can you tell me the letters behind your name, please, again?
I'm sorry. C.H.A.C. and INHC.
Okay. I will add the emojis, and we're at 3, 2, 1. So I'm going to introduce you, and then we'll go ahead and launch. And I'm going to try to keep an eye here.
What are you going to? Are you going to go about 45? Do you think?
Yeah.
Okay.
And if we wrap up, that's great. Just there's not a lot of pressure to do that in a certain time frame that way. Okay.
Sounds good.
So I do believe we are live, and I'm going to shut this down because I'm not going to need that. And just make sure we're in the group live. I'm going to refresh. And we're waiting, everybody. We shall be with you momentarily. And it looks like we are connected. Let me just double check here. We are. All right. Good evening, everybody. This is Karen Hurd, and with WomanWize Healthy Living, we are so glad you are joining us. This is before the 4th of July, and we're here to talk about what I believe, and I think what our guest also believes, is one of the front and center health issues in America today. Our lifestyles absolutely destroy this particular part of our body. At the same time, the research on this system in our body is absolutely exploding, and that is gut biome and gut health, and how that impacts things that we had no idea even 10 years ago were impacted by this. And I would say that holistic people, as you know, if you went to a holistic practitioner like Debbie several years ago, one of the places she might have started is with your gut. And holistic people have been doing this almost intuitively for a very, very long time. In fact, the company we're with, one of the first products they introduced back in the 50s was a gut product, right? In the age of Spam and Cheese Whiz, a gut product. So I'd like to introduce to you, and I'm very pleased to have my good friend Debbie Miller, and she she had a lifetime of illnesses and debilitating conditions. And isn't that how many of us get started in looking for answers for what is troubling us? And she was looking for the true root cause of these seemingly obscure accumulations of health conditions. Her journey took her through many of the challenges of allopathic medicine. Remember, we talked about allopathic medicine earlier, and that's traditional medical practice. Not always bad, but sometimes doesn't always fit the bill. And opened her eyes to an absolutely new way of thinking around health and healing. She's been working in the health and nutrition field for over 12 years. She is a certified holistic health practitioner and an integrative nutrition health coach. She has studied extensively with the Northwest Academy of Practical Nutrition. And Debbie is currently studying functional nutrition. So we're going to have to ask her the difference between practical and functional. And most recently receiving her certificate of completion from Andrea Nakayama's Functional Nutrition Lab Digestive Enzyme. That's a mouthful, Debbie. And thank you so much for joining us tonight in our group. And we're so glad to have you. Where do you hail from?
I'm in Michigan.
Whereabouts?
In Lansing.
In Lansing, all right.
Yep.
I'm a Detroit girl, born and raised.
I knew that.
Michiganders, we can sense each other out.
Right, that's right.
So what we're going to talk about tonight, what are you bringing to us tonight?
We're going to be talking about the new frontier, even though it's really the old new frontier, what we're learning, what we know, what we're learning, and then what that means for the future.
Okay. And if you guys see me looking off screen, I'm looking to see in the live because we're going to be taking your questions. And so I want to make sure that I can actually see them. But if not, we'll cycle around and Debbie will be with you with that. So Debbie, real quick, what is the difference between functional and practical nutrition?
Okay, so with functional nutrition, it's like functional medicine. If you've heard about functional medicine at all, it's root cause, talking about body systems, not necessarily trying to pinpoint a symptom and then trying to go from there and put something on that symptom, but going back to the function of the body and those body systems and what can we do at the root of what's going on.
Okay, hold on. I'm trying to get the sound down. I apologize, Debbie.
No problem.
So functional has to do with getting to the root of the system.
Absolutely.
And practical has to do with?
Just basic nutrition and how that all comes together with food, supplements, lifestyle.
Okay, fantastic, fantastic. And so if you want to share the screen, just go ahead. You've got controls. You can go ahead and just take it away. And I'm going to be monitoring the questions as they come in. Why do you call it the new frontier?
Oops, hold on just a second here.
That's all right. You are good.
There we go. Well, I mean, as you mentioned, I mean, we know this, and you'll see here as I begin to talk, this information's been around forever. It's just that we're discovering so much more in how we take this information and use it for the future.
Great, great. Yeah, I was just starting to read a book on gut health. Mm-hmm. And we've always kind of in C.H.A.C, you know, a lot of times when I first got into the wellness business, that was one of the first things they talked about. And we were talking about leaky gut. And I thought, leaky gut, what the heck is that? I mean, it's kind of weird thing to go into. And, but the symptoms were described to me. And I remember one time watching a video of one of my children when this child was an infant, and we didn't have a video camera, so it was the one video we had, right? This is back in the olden days. And we had, I was watching and realized that this child I was always holding this child. This child was always crying, always whining. And I remember one of my early nutrition trainers, she was a pediatrician, telling me there's no such thing as an unhappy baby. A crying baby is a baby that doesn't feel well. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden now I could put that crying baby together with what I was learning, and sure enough, leaky gut was what was going on. And that was my introduction to gut health.
Yeah, so true. Well, thanks so much for having me, Karen.
Oh, glad to have you.
This is truly a pleasure to be able to get more of this information out there. And as you'll see why I'm so passionate about this, but this is truly, gut health is truly foundational for all health. And the more we discover, the more we realize that that is absolutely true.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Go. All right.
Floor is yours.
Okay. So a little bit about my story, just a quick overview because it was a lifetime. We'll just go over a few of the highlights, not particularly highlights as in good. So similar to your daughter, I was a sickly child. Even from the day I was born, lots of antibiotics, allergies, migraines, got to be a teenager and, you know, really difficult periods and so forth. That just continued, the whole cycle. Seasonal allergies, you know, spring and fall, down for the count with migraines. And then when I got older, things like my joints, the synovial fluid was actually leaking out of my joints and causing these big bulging, painful joints. Had to go and have injections in those, and I'd get the injections and they'd come back, but I had no idea that any of these symptoms were related. Well, about the time my son was graduating from college, I had a round of broad spectrum antibiotics. Totally threw me for a loop. That was like the last straw. And from there, it was like nothing stayed. Everything just went right through. Went to the doctors, multitude of them, each one of them giving me a pharmaceutical that was supposed to help. And of course, we know that those cause symptoms, and then you have to go to another pharmaceutical to cover the symptoms from the previous one. And it was just a major snowballing of this ill health. So in the same time frame, my son was going from one Z-Pack to the next, and he himself had all these health issues. In retrospect, I know that I probably passed my problems onto him in the birth canal, and that's another whole ball game. So long story short, I had gone back to the doctor one last time, and he looked at me and he said, "Are you depressed?" Well, of course I was depressed. Literally, I was living on the couch. I could eat nothing but broths. And later, I find out that actually I was reacting to the ingredients in the broth. So, but I had no life. And he basically wanted to prescribe an antidepressant. And I just said, no, thanks. And I went home and I talked with my son, because he had now gotten better through a connection with a personal trainer. And it took him 2 years to convince me. The problem is, you know, I didn't know that he could help me. And, you know, your son, that's kind of a reversing of all the roles. But anyway, long story short, they got me hooked up with a nutritional program. And 10 months later, I had my life back. So this is a picture of me. I just took this snippet off from my business card, but it was quite a turnaround. We've talked, Karen, you mentioned a few things with weight. When people are dealing with this, and what I was dealing with was leaky gut and candida overgrowth. Back then, you know, people looked at you like you were crazy if you even mentioned it. But people who are going through this, almost without fail, cannot lose weight. The hormones are so messed up that it just doesn't come off. You talked about mood. Of course, I was depressed because, you know, I didn't have a life, but the other part of that was that the condition that I had actually caused depression. And we'll talk more about that and how that all manifests. My immune system was shot. You know, all of my allergies, and I was just lucky that my son got to me before I ended up with an autoimmune condition or something. And cravings. When you have gut dysbiosis like this, your body is craving what it needs, and especially with the yeast. When you think about cooking, the yeast feeds on sugar. So you're craving these sugars. It can be caused, the cravings can be caused by the dysbiosis itself or nutritional deficiencies. Stress, we'll talk more about why that is such a biggie. And then, of course, lack of sleep. Have you ever noticed when you don't get your night's sleep, the next day you're much more hungry? And that's a big part here too. So we used to think that candida, it's also called gut permeability or leaky gut, happened in isolation. There wasn't really a connection between all of these other things that were going on. There wasn't a connection to autoimmune, even though I suspected it. We never really connected it to that and other health conditions. And looking back at my situation, I can't believe no one ever mentioned fibromyalgia. I had every symptom. I always suspected that the leaky gut was part of this autoimmune explosion. But I was real careful not to say that because we didn't know at that time, and we needed to be careful. But just to cover this, I want people to understand how important this whole gut permeability thing is. If you look at this little diagram here, you'll see on the left, you'll see healthy gut, and then on the right, you'll see the leaky gut. And if you look down, you'll see the tight junctions on each side. The healthy gut, the tight junctions are closed together, so nothing can leak out of those the cells. And we talk about the the cell that covers the intestinal tract, and it's literally one cell thick. So if you get any kind of irritation on the gut, whether it be food sensitivity, something that's just you're not agreeing with, food allergies, anything that causes irritation there, you can see how easily we can end up with this leaky gut. The problem comes when those tight junctions come apart and the molecules from the undigested food, the endotoxins from the yeasts and bacteria, whenever that gets into the bloodstream, then all of a sudden the immune system doesn't know what to do with that. We have a foreign invader, and then we know that body, the immune system, starts attacking. And depending on how many exposures we get, it continues to get worse and worse.
Can I just interrupt you?
Absolutely.
I don't know if this is two things, just because I want to make sure everybody understands the same definitions.
Yep.
Just real quick, because I know you might be getting into it later. What is the difference between a food allergy and a food sensitivity?
Okay, so a sensitivity just means that you may have maybe some gas and bloating, but when you're getting a full-on allergy or an intolerance, as in celiac, that's an entirely different thing. That's a full-on immune response to whatever food that you're eating.
So it's whether or not the immune system is involved.
Exactly.
Although an allergy can sometimes have similar symptoms to a sensitivity.
It can, yes.
Right. And one other question that I had for you about this, when you say, and part of the role of the digestive tract is to break down the food to the point where when it goes into your bloodstream, it is too small for the immune system to recognize.
Exactly. Okay. We weren't meant to handle these large molecules like this.
And they're perfectly fine molecules if they're not in your bloodstream ahead of time.
Right. And we really don't want those endotoxins and things to leak through at any point. So,
right.
Yeah. But yeah, so the more exposures you get, the more that those molecules leak through, then it becomes a bigger and bigger problem as your immune system ramps up and you've got all kinds of inflammation going. So you can see antibiotics are gonna be problematic here. Autoimmunity, diet can be problematic if you've got those food sensitivities or intolerances going on. Infections, low stomach acid, we'll talk more about that in a minute. NSAID, stress, again, we'll talk about that, and toxins. So yeah, this is a real big deal. So just a little bit about the connection between leaky gut and autoimmune. We now know that autoimmunity begins when our immune system starts throwing darts at things, at these perceived invaders in the bloodstream. And what happens is we've got collateral damage to the tissues in close proximity or wherever there's a genetic weakness. And this is your inflammatory response, and it can lead to possible autoimmune problems. So left unchecked, this onslaught of inflammatory cytokines means big trouble for our health.
And what is a cytokine?
Cytokine is those inflammatory marker, or that's just what they're called, those inflammatory pieces that are going to be, when we talk about, cutting our finger, that's one thing. We get a little inflammation at the site. But when we have, aching joints like I did, all of these different, and this can mean heart disease as well, but when we get all these inflammatory cytokines going through our body, this is when we end up in trouble. We'll talk more about that in a second here. Just to kind of put this into perspective here, 80 million in the United States have autoimmune conditions, and that's actually more than have cancer, heart disease, or diabetes combined. That is huge. Massive. And it's costing us $100 billion annually. Mark Hyman, I'll be talking about him a bit. He's the director of the Cleveland Clinic Institute for Functional Medicine, and the Institute for Functional Medicine. So his phrase is always, we have to figure out what pissed off our immune system. And if you want to get better, you just have to make sure that you're stopping that addition of all that fuel to whatever fire is going on. Couple of things you want to make sure you're continually getting your CRP tested. That's your C-reactive protein, which is a marker of inflammation. Vitamin D is huge in all this picture. I suggest everybody get tested at least once a year, probably twice a year, for their 25 hydroxy vitamin D level. Some doctors will tell you you're fine. Know your number. We want to know that that is up around 50, and for some it needs to be higher than that.
Yeah.
And then possibly that ANA marker.
The anti-nuclear antibody.
Exactly. You know all about that, Karen.
Well, I have a child that has lupus.
Right.
And so the ANAs, and they should be negative. You should have like no ANAs.
Right. It's not always definitive. It can kind of be a funny thing where you can get a false positive, but that's a good place to start so you know what you're dealing with.
And you would have somebody check their ANAs. I mean, I've told people to get their C-reactive protein levels checked for years. It's a great overall. Long-term inflammation is like the root of a lot of diseases, and now we're talking about the root to the long-term inflammation.
Yeah.
But why would you suggest the ANAs? I mean, if somebody goes to their doctor and says, I'd like my ANA checked, you're going to get a pretty dang funny look.
I know. The key is to find an integrative doctor or a functional medicine doctor. They would do it. Yep. Yeah. So, you know, it might be nothing, but when you've got all this inflammation going on, it's always best to check. Karen, are you seeing my night screen right now? Or are you seeing a full-on screen?
It's looking good, and I'm checking it on Facebook, and we're looking awesome.
Okay, good. So here are some of the little-known risks of gut dysbiosis and dysfunction. So any gut dysfunction puts us at higher risk for SIBO, and
which
actually 70 to 80% of the people who have been diagnosed with IBS actually have SIBO.
What is SIBO?
SIBO is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So if you're getting a lot of high stomach pain, all that pressure, it could be, they're not pathogenic at all. It's just that the bacteria from the gut has migrated too far north. So,
so it's in effect left the gut.
Pardon?
When we say gut, we're talking about the intestines, right? We say gut, we're talking about the intestines. And so when you say has left the gut and gone far north, do you mean that this bacteria that should be in your gut in its little home is escaped and now living outside of the gut?
It's up too high.
Okay. Yep. Okay.
And all of this also can lead to iron deficiency anemia. And actually this goes for any mineral, because with minerals, we need a nice acid wash on our minerals to break them down. And if we're not breaking those down, then we're not going to absorb them. Our nutrition only is comprised of what we can actually absorb. Another one that's difficult to absorb is the B12. So those can be problematic with people that have this dysbiosis or dysfunction.
Okay.
David Perlmutter, you may have heard of him. Grain Brain, done a lot of work here. He's a functional medicine doc as well. He says rebalance the gut and you rebalance your immune system. So going into what we know, this was back 100 years ago, and this was Professor Metchnikoff, and he was a 1908 Nobel laureate, bacteriologist, he worked in the prolongation of life, fermented foods. I mean, here we are today with fermented foods and bacterial cultures.
Isn't that amazing? I really think people, it's been said, people were working along these lines 100 years ago. Yep. I mean, they were looking at nutritional responses to cancer back in the 30s. Yeah.
Yep. Everything old is new again, right? So a couple of the projects that have been done, the Human Genome Project, we're not going to talk extensively about this tonight, but you should know this was done by the NIH, went on from the 1990 to 2003. Basically, it was a mapping of the entire human genome, and this has been very telling. It's given us so much information that we can actually work with, and in conjunction to the microbiome. So the NIH Human Microbiome Project was started in 2007. So this is what we know, what we're learning, and the future in this area. This is an ongoing project. It was established with the mission of generating research resources, enabling comprehensive characterization of the human microbiota and analysis of their role in human health and disease. The information generated by the HMP is made available worldwide for use by investigators and others in an effort to understand and improve human health. So this was done in 2 phases. The first one was a focus on the development of DNA sequencing, data sets, and characterization of the microbiome in healthy adults. The second phase is ongoing, actually. It's an integrative human microbiome project, creating data sets of biological properties of the microbiome and the host.
And the host would be us.
The human, yeah, exactly. So some of the current projects, I mean, this is huge. I mean, this is where nutrition can really make a difference. We've got pregnancy and preterm birth. I like to get my parents at least a year before they conceive, and then of course continue on. Onset of inflammatory bowel disease, these are rampant. Onset of type 2 diabetes, we all know that that's a big problem as well.
Mm-hmm.
So just understand, putting this all in perspective, what I'm talking about tonight is just a minuscule part of this massive mountain of scientific evidence, and we're adding to this every day with research studies. So what is the microbiome and what does it do? So first, the microbiome is the combined genetic material of the microorganisms in a particular environment. And Karen, I think you mentioned this earlier in your video today. We might have a microbiome of the skin. We know that there's a microbiome of the breast. So, I mean, this is huge for cancer research. So we have all of these different biomes in our body. It's exciting to know where this is all going to go.
And I often say we are fearfully and wonderfully made.
Absolutely, absolutely.
We are created, we are designed. Amen.
Yep.
Yeah, right.
Yep. We depend on a vast army of microbes for our life. The microbiome protects us against germs. It breaks down our food to release energy, produces vitamins, and it plays a significant role in the communication that goes on between the brain and the gut. And we'll talk about that more later. If you can imagine, we have 3.5 to 4.5 pounds of this bacteria and fungi, which now has a name, the fungome, and viruses, the virome, everything has a name now. So there are actually 500 different species of bacteria in our gut. And this composition is entirely unique to us. It's like a fingerprint. And we'll talk more. The microbiome changes according to diet, environment, lifestyle, prescription, drugs, and age. So you can see where we can have a bearing on some of this.
I think modern life overall has really destroyed our biomes.
Yep. Yeah, we can go into that for processed food and so forth. Diet has the greatest impact of all. We can actually change in 24 hours according to what we eat. This microbiome, but we must sustain the health of the microbiome for the long term and make those long-term changes. We've got all of these therapeutic diets now. We have the gut and psychology diet, the FODMAP diet, the specific carb, paleo, keto, all of these different diets. And I just want to put out a word of caution here. Be careful that you don't go to the internet and try and put these pieces on you without some consideration. There is so much information out there, and these diets are all good for someone, but it doesn't mean that each of these diets is good for everyone. Each one of us is a bio-individual and requires different things for our health. So just be careful on this. Just a little bit about the Institute of Functional Medicine. This is root cause medicine. It's talking about body systems and how we go about building health from that root and what that dysfunction is. They have done so much research here. So the microbiome is the interface between our diet and ourselves. Or put another way, the microbiome and the gut wall is the interface between the outside world with all of its toxins and our bloodstream.
Wow, I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, so I mean, you can tell how important that is if all of a sudden that gut wall is compromised with that one cell that can be irritated. And another consideration, are we reacting to the food that we're supposedly sensitive to, or are we possibly allergic or sensitive to a toxin that's in that food? So here are some influences of the health of the microbiome. We know that the food can be problematic. Lifestyle, whether or not you're rushing from one appointment to the next, or whether or not you take some time to do some meditation or some scripture, whatever you do in the morning to really get yourself off on a good start. The science is exploding over all of this meditation type of activity. It truly is. It's not just fluff. This is real.
And now you're talking about what they call psychoimmunity.
In what way, Karen?
I remember Dr. Bruce Miller. Are you familiar with him?
Yeah.
And Dr. Miller was talking about how they were learning about the power of the mind. And I don't mean in some kind of woohoo way.
Yep.
Where they would ask specifically cancer patients, and they were asking children in one case, to envision what it would take to kill their cancer. And in the case of this one child, every day the therapist would go in and she'd say, "What's it going to take to kill your cancer?" And she said, "Draw your cancer." And he would draw this horribly ugly thing. And she would say, "Now draw something that will take care of, that will make the cancer go away or kill it." And he would draw this really huge monster to eat up the cancer. And over time, the cancer was getting smaller and smaller in his drawings. Mm-hmm. And one day she said to him, it was probably over several months, what have you, "I want you to draw your cancer." He goes, "I can't. It's not there anymore."
Wow.
And later that week, they got word that it was gone.
Wow.
But the idea was that the mind, they were studying a branch called psychoimmunity. Mm-hmm. And I think, I was actually reading a little bit about it, and it gets like super complicated, like mega fast. But the idea that when you can especially harness the power in your mind, that Absolutely. It releases chemicals and so forth to your immune system and enables your immune system to fight better.
Absolutely. Mindset is everything. It really is. So a little bit about stress. Stress is an interesting mechanism. When we go into that fight or flight mode to battle off that saber-toothed tiger, what's happening is, and this is, just as we go about our life, the blood flow goes to the major organs. The sad thing is that our digestive system suffers, and the blood flow, because it's gone to the major organs that are going to help us, get away from this saber-toothed tiger, the digestive system suffers. And so what you've got is the nutrients aren't absorbed. The health of the digestive system suffers because that blood flow isn't there to nourish it with everything, the oxygen and the nutrients that are coming in. And of course, we know our environment has a big deal to do with the microbiome. We know something about earthing and how that happens, where we're actually going out in nature and experiencing all of that, the toxins, the bad things in the environment as well. And this is interesting. They are actually discovering that our microbiome can be influenced by the people that are closest to us. Now, I don't know if they've actually parsed this out of whether or not that person is actually transmitting, back and forth the microbiome pieces, or whether or not this is due to the fact that maybe they have the same diet, they have similar lifestyles. So that's going to be interesting to see where this goes. And of course, we know that certain drugs can be really problematic. Antibiotics is one of our a big deal. They're going to be killing off the good along with the bad. Processed foods, very irritating. Try and stay with the whole foods if you can. We know that the proton pump inhibitors are a problem. You're not breaking down, you don't have that acid in your gut. You're taking away the acid that can break down your minerals. And some people have said that they are responsible for landing our senior population in nursing homes because of bone breaks.
And I would also say that there's some increased evidence that they may be linked to early onset on Alzheimer's.
Yes. Yep. And of course, then we've got the pesticides, Roundup and so forth, but probably one of the biggest factors is sugar. It feeds the yeast. It's just something we want to be able to minimize. So this is just kind of, don't tell me to improve my diet. I ate a carrot once and nothing happened. So the idea here is that we want to make sure that we're doing something a little bit bigger than one carrot, and we want to be able to sustain that and really take this seriously. So with the Institute for Functional Medicine, this was a tweet that came out here a couple weeks ago. You are what you eat, but you are also what the thing you are eating ate. Think about that a second. So if your meat was fed on inflammatory grains, it's like you're eating that too.
It's so glad that you did this, because I'm really blessed at how everything's coming together. Just last week, we had on Scott Cooper of Sweetwater
Yes.
Fat and Meats, and we were talking about the importance of animals being fed properly in order to make the food. And that's why sometimes people are allergic to conventional eggs.
Absolutely.
But they can eat organic and pasture-raised eggs.
Right. Yep. So here are just a couple of examples, like you're saying. I have a friend who has celiac, but if she has eggs that the chickens have been fed any kind of gluten, she has a major reaction. Or it could be problematic for a Candida client getting a side of hormones and antibiotics with their beef. So this is Dr. Mark Hyman's quote again: "Your fork is the most powerful tool to transform your health and change the world." And when we get into the discussion around brain health, this will really make sense. What we put into our bodies is not only changing our digestive system, but it's also changing our brains. So food is medicine. I just wanted to put out some caution here about fermented foods. This is where we come to the point where we talk about one person's food, maybe some of these superfoods, is a health food for them, but not for everybody. It can be another person's poison. So a superfood, I get a little nervous when people start talking superfoods, because they're not superfoods to everyone. Certain strains of biotics actually give off undesirable byproducts for certain populations. A big one is if people have an overactive histamine release, or they're just sensitive to histamine. These can be problematic. So some of these companies are putting out products, yogurts and kombuchas and so forth. They're saying proprietary strains. Well, that's unconscionable. We need to know what those strains are and what effect they're going to have on our health. Kombuchas will also have that sugar, alcohol, bacteria, and yeast. So, for people with any kind of yeast overgrowth, that's going to be problematic. And Dr. Steve C.H.A.C has also cautioned us against the use of kombucha. Dr. C.H.A.C is an esteemed cancer researcher and a professor emeritus from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And of course, with these sugar, alcohol, all of these components, liver health is a question.
Can I ask you a question about kombucha?
Yeah, absolutely.
I was brewing mine for a while, and I just didn't feel right about it. And people said, "Oh, you should give it to your daughter," but I know she's got. And I thought, you know what? She's got an autoimmune. I'm not giving homebrewed kombucha to that. But what about? And I would think that by the time they bottle kombucha, they may have killed with the heat that you have to have with pasteurization. So does store-bought kombucha have anything left after it's been processed? Because it has to be processed to be sold in the store. Right.
I think one way to determine that, I know I'm incredibly sensitive to alcohol, and for the most part, I can feel a difference. Now, there are some that are actually they're processed so that the bacteria continues to grow, and there actually is a warning on the label now saying that people under 18 shouldn't be able to buy these. I can definitely tell that the alcohol content is there. So my guess is yes. And then with homemade kombucha, I know I've had people offer me them before, but if that SCOBY is damaged, the consequence can be an undesirable bacteria. Yeah. And if you're doing kimchi or something like that, something that has been from a reputable company, that's probably not going to be a problem. But just take it slow. And people who have candida yeast should not be doing fermented foods at all. So I'm on a journey of discovery, and I hope you'll come along with me. Understand that you don't need to remember all of this. The purpose of this is just to give you an overview and help you to understand the interconnections of all of this. So what is the collective we learning? First, we're learning that the bulk of the mental problems that we see out there are not necessarily a brain problem, and they may not be a brain problem at all. You'll see what I mean here. I'm not saying that it's not real. I'm just saying that some of these problems may not be a brain problem. So this is kind of a complicated infographic here, but we're learning that everything is interconnected, and we're talking here about the gut-brain axis, but we're also talking about the microbiota. So all three of those things are coming together here. So you'll see on the left side where the messages are coming from the brain. We're getting neurotransmitters, the serotonin and dopamine, the neuromuscular control of peristalsis. Fight or flight or stress response goes from the brain, and as we talked about, that's affecting our digestive system. Coming back from the digestive system to the brain, we've got the short-chain fatty acids, the butyrate, barrier integrity signaling with the zonulin, immune signaling, neuropeptides and neurotransmitters with the leptin and the serotonin, and the vagus nerve activation. And this is where the information comes as far as the vagus nerve. All of this is connecting through the vagus nerve.
And just a couple of definitions. Peristalsis is the squeezing action of both your throat, because when you swallow food, it's getting pushed down. Also, it's what the colon does to move the contents through. That's what peristalsis is. And the butyrate is a compound from the good guys, correct? Yep. And neurotransmitters, central nervous system, these happen to be in the brain, and immune signaling. So just trying to break that down for some folks.
Yep, and we'll talk more about those. I'm sorry, Karen, what?
And barrier integrity means your gut doesn't have a hole in it.
Exactly. Let's see, you'd asked about, yep, I'm not thinking of, here, let's go on. Okay, so the vagus nerve and why it's so important. Just a word, I know what it was, peristalsis. People who have type 2 diabetes, even though they've been on medications to kind of control that, I worked with a client who actually had the vagus nerve damaged through this whole process. A gentleman's up in his 70s or so, and he's developed gastroparesis, which is basically the paralyzing of the not being able to get that peristalsis going from the stomach, so he can't empty his stomach. So this can be a problem, but these are things that we can work on if they're not permanent through stimulating the vagus nerve. We'll talk about that in a second. So the vagus nerve is called a wandering nerve. It begins in the brainstem and it works its way through several organs, communication center for the brain, stomach, digestive tract, lungs, heart, spleen, intestines, liver, and kidneys. It's part of the parasympathetic nervous system and is responsible for calming that fight or flight response. So this is important because if you're always feeling wired and tired, it could be that vagus nerve needs some help. For purposes of this discussion, this calming effect helps the digestive tract return to normal, allowing that blood flow to come back, nourishing the organ, and further providing the nutrient absorption. And then we say we're in that rest and digest mode. Okay, so we talked about the stimulating the peristalsis for elimination, and we talked about the gastroparesis. The vagus nerve also stimulates the enzyme secretion, and 20% of the enzymes that we have are attributable to the vagus nerve. So breaking down that food. The vagus nerve helps activate the neurochemical acetylcholine, which has a role in the production of hydrochloric acid in the stomach. So especially if you don't have your gallbladder, this becomes incredibly important. Making sure that vagus nerve can help with that production of the HCl. The vagus nerve also stimulates the release of bile, which helps us break down our fats. Those are probably the hardest thing to break down. Vagus nerve can become damaged in car accidents or head injuries. So if you know somebody that's had those situations and their gut issues just aren't coming around, this could be why. But there are many ways that we can stimulate the vagus nerve and improve the health. We call it vagal tone, and improve that gut-brain connection. So this is kind of a complicated slide here. Just bear with me here, and we'll get through it. So if we bring all of this together, the microbiota, the gut-brain axis, this is a really complex communication system, but if you just understand how this all comes together, emerging data suggests that the function and health of the central nervous system, and as the principal organ in it, is modulated by the complex interaction amongst a number of, I'm gonna have to move this here so I can see, number of factors. Multiple routes of communication between the gut and brain have been established, and this research is ongoing. These include the vagus nerve, the immune system, and remember, 70 to 80% of our immune system is made in the gut. Short-chain fatty acids and tryptophan. The vagus nerve is considered by some authors to be the principal interface of the microbiota gut-brain axis. So it just shows you how important it is. The channels of communication between the gut and the brain are influenced by three major things: the composition and diversity of the gut microbiota. And for those people that continue to eat the same foods every day, I really encourage you to branch out. Get as many different varieties of fruits and vegetables and whole foods into your diet as you can, because that's going to contribute to the diversity of the microbiome, and that's where the health of it really gets magnified.
And before you go tonight, we're going to have you give a few suggestions, because what tends to happen is when people don't feel good,
yep,
the free foods they eat, and what they're doing is they get into this very negative loop where they can only eat the 2 or 3 or 4 foods, and their gut biota gets actually smaller in terms of diversity. You want lots of different kinds of good guys. They get smaller and smaller and smaller, so you try to eat something to expand it, and now you're uncomfortable. So we're going to look from you today, before you go, a few tips to help people expand out of that, you know.
Right, that's an excellent point, Karen, because I know when I was so sick, literally in the end, all I was having was broth. I had Starbucks Frappuccinos, this sounds terrible, and ice cream. I mean, the ice cream and the Starbucks Frappuccinos was the sugar that was keeping me going. I had no idea. And the broth actually contained yeast, which I was sensitive to because I was dealing with yeast. So, but this is it, and I would go to the store and I'd buy all these fruits and vegetables, and I'd come home and they'd make me sick. So truly they did. Believe me. So the neurotransmitters, hormones, and immune and neuropeptides produced in the gut, and the communication between all of these and the gut microbes, all that communication going on. The integrity of the intestinal wall serving as the physical barrier to the external environment. If our gut wall is damaged, watch out. This information came from a meta-analysis recently from this Dr. Mateus, and it was published in the journal Microorganisms. This study, people, functional medicine docs especially, were all over this. This is really exciting stuff. So what does all of this mean for the future? Now, when I talk about the future, some of this is preliminary science. We can't really go out and say we've cured MS yet or anything like that, but these are exciting things that are coming down the pike. So for me, everything came full circle. This science has been incredibly validating for everything that I was going through earlier. As I was sitting in those doctor's office all those years ago, and people looked at me like I was crazy, and they really did. I really felt alone, unempowered, and helpless. So the last straw was that question, are you depressed? I knew where he was going with that, and I just wasn't going to go there. So for myself, I chose a different path, and I was able to bring things around, and I think most people can. So here's some of the research that's coming out. Broken Brain is a series done and facilitated by Mark Hyman again. If you go on Facebook, if this is a topic you're interested in, you should be able to find it.
Okay, hold on. I want to hold, and I want everybody, if you can hear us, okay, we had one person lose audio. I just want to make sure we have audio for everybody else. So if you can hear us, please type a Y. And no, I'm not going to sign it. So if you can hear us, type a Y. I know it's being recorded. Okay, then we may have, guys, what I'm going to have to do is, Debbie, we're going to have you keep going.
Okay.
And okay, go ahead and keep going, and then we'll try to pick back up.
Okay. All right, so Broken Brain, as I said, was facilitated by Dr. Mark Hyman. If you go on Facebook and either search his name, Hyman, or Broken Brain, you should be able to find this, and it's free right now. They're coming towards the end, so you might want to jump on that pretty quick. This is an exciting book, The End of Alzheimer's. Dr. Dale Bredesen is doing amazing work. He is actually turning cases of Alzheimer's around.
Wow, that's life-saving, family-saving.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I wish this information had been around when my dad was going through it. And then the psychobiotic revolution, we kind of, the mood-food connection there. Dr. Chatterjee is actually a doc from the UK, and he put out a series on their TV over there, Doctor in the House. And he accumulated families with terrible health problems. And he just did some very simple, hard to implement for most people, but very simple changes into their diet and lifestyle, and was able to turn their health around. I hear that this may be coming to the US, but this is going to be very helpful for people to see. It doesn't take huge changes. It's just those small daily changes that we make that can really make a difference. The future for MS, I call this the tale of two studies. The first one was reported in the journal PNAS. Gut bacteria may trigger MS, which, I've had an inkling on this for quite a while. Harvard Medical School reported in the journal Nature, gut bacteria's potential role in MS. New study discovers pathways mediating inflammation involving connections between molecules produced by gut bacteria breaking down food.
And I have been reading how people have been talking about aspartame.
Yep.
Aspartame and MS, and it would make sense because aspartame does what? Destroys your gut.
Right.
It's like an antibiotic.
Right, and nervous system.
Yep.
The future for C. diff, this is a different one. I don't know if you've heard this or not. C. diff is commonly contracted in hospital settings, and for the people that are most vulnerable, which are most, a lot of them are elderly, it can be treated by antibiotics, but for the most part, it keeps coming back. It's difficult to treat. Long-term safety of this particular treatment hasn't been determined yet, but basically what they're doing is, just like it sounds, a fecal transplant of taking the microbiota from one person and inserting it into another, and basically they're getting rid of this horrible C. diff diarrhea virtually overnight.
Because C. diff can kill.
Yeah, it's serious.
And they'll treat it with antibiotics, which is actually feeding the wrong bacteria, increasing the C. diff. Yeah.
Exactly. Kind of like that snowball thing.
Mm-hmm.
So then we've got the future of nutrigenomics. Nutrigenomics is the scientific study of the interaction of nutrition and genes and how they interact, especially with regard to the prevention of treatment and disease. So when we're talking nutrition, we have a lot of things that we can do here. We are also, okay, so we talked a little bit before about what we ate. All right, so this is a little bit different. We are also what eats what we eat. Okay, so, and this is, yeah, you have to think about that a second. All right, so what is eating the food that we eat? That's all those microbes, okay? So those microbes and the metabolites they give off And these factors control how our genes and our DNA are expressed.
And what's a metabolite?
The metabolite, that's the byproduct of the microbiome eating the food.
So that would be, I'm just going to try to get, so when you want bread to rise, you feed it sugar, gives off a gas, the gas makes the bread rise. The metabolite in this case would be the gas from the yeast.
Not necessarily. This could be the good. So for instance, say we're eating good fruits and vegetables, and the microbiome eats that. Then what's given off, though, is the metabolites. And these factors are what bathe our genes, okay? These metabolites. They bathe our genes, and whether or not what we're eating is good or bad determines whether or not those genes are turned on or they're turned off. So we're in control here. The food we eat has the ability to either cause disease or prevent it. Does that make sense, Karen?
I love it.
Okay, good.
No, it absolutely makes sense. And I think I'm so excited we're talking about personalized nutrition, because I know that our brand partner is going more and more and more in that, and has wanted to for a long time, but you have to make it available to people at a cost they can afford.
Right.
And especially because something like this would be used probably likely without a professional. So it has to go through all these other considerations.
Right, it has to be something that anybody can do.
This might be what eating for your blood type people were trying to get at. And maybe some of these other, like the plant paradox, it seems like that's what that's all trying to get at, this personalized nutrition. Yeah.
I guess we'll see. We know more about the human genome, the nutrigenomics, the microbiome, and the genetic testing. So this has given us a lot of background. We have the ability to personalize our nutrition programs to serve us each as individuals. And remember, again, we're not trying to make one diet that's good for everybody, because that's never going to happen. Each of us is different. We have different heritage, which people adapt to those diets in other cultures. And when they come here, there's that process. So what one population considers a health food may not be healthy for someone else. So we have to be wary. Statements on the internet like eat more vegetables, take that adaptogenic supplement, or you need to go keto, fail to address the needs of that specific individual. And some of the considerations that we take into account would be the health status of the individual, whatever health or diet sensitivities they had. We've got all these categories now: nightshades, lectins, whole grains, histamines. We have to take into account their pharmaceuticals. Are the pharmaceuticals causing nutritional deficiencies? Maybe we need to add some CoQ10 or whatever the nutrient might be. Lifestyle, of course, social consciousness. People believe in certain things. Many people are vegan because they believe that that's the way we should eat. Cultural differences, of course. So what are nutrition professionals talking about? I'm a member of the American College of Nutrition, and this is their program for this coming up conference. We have genome malleability. We're talking about nutrition, genes, longevity, and chronic disease. Do we have anything that can help here? We absolutely do. Yep, and that's what I was afraid of here. Those notifications.
Yeah.
Neurocognition, personalized. We're talking about implications in neurodevelopment and neurodegenerative disorders. A nutrigenomic approach to the prevention and reversal of Alzheimer's and cognitive impairment. Food, mood, and metabolism, and it goes on here. So you can see where this is all going.
I love that, because I think it gives hope to a lot of people who feel very stuck in loops.
Yeah,
and that's very stuck because they're falling through the cracks. They can't find you on the insurance grid the doc has. Your symptoms, and for many of these things, the symptoms are really quite vague, right? I mean, The symptoms like for fibro can look like the symptoms for this, can look like the symptoms for that.
Exactly, and we have to be able to discern the difference, and that's why, you know, when I said seemingly random symptoms, you know, how does that all come together? Well, we have to be able to differentiate between, you know, where that root cause is, and the root cause of all these symptoms coming together. So it's it can be difficult. All right, so we talk about in coaching the non-negotiables. What are the non-negotiables? It might be food, it might be lifestyle, but I talk about the foundational four-legged stool. We have a pro and prebiotic system that we want to talk about. Fiber, nutrients, and protein. Those are the non-negotiables, that four-legged stool. So I like to use a solid, well-researched probiotic that's encapsulated to withstand that acidic environment in the stomach, to make sure that those little critters get to the colon alive so that they can be used in this microbiome. We want to make sure that they're well-researched probiotics. We want to make sure that we're not adding a probiotic that may give off histamine for someone who's sensitive to it. We want to make sure we're using the most well-studied forms and strains of probiotics. We also want to make sure we're getting an appropriate prebiotic to nourish and feed the healthy gut bacteria. So if we're getting too much or if we're getting the wrong kind, bloating, gas, and misery, seriously. And we want to make sure we're getting an ultra-pure protein shake. And I say shake because they're easy, they're quick, and people are being, they're assured that they're going to be getting the nutrients in there.
And I think too, on this protein, it should be best if it's washed, water washed, and in such a way to remove the lectins.
Yep.
And the goitogenic and the antithyroid compounds without destroying the live enzymes in them.
Absolutely, absolutely. We want to make sure it's got enough fiber in there too.
Yeah.
In a complete amino acid profiles to make sure that we're nourishing and rebuilding those healthy cells. And then we want an advanced multivitamin mineral strip to ensure the nourishment of the detoxification pathways. When people are working on their health, say for instance, they might be losing weight. You think about where all those toxins are stored. They're stored in our fat cells.
Yep.
And as we lose weight, we're releasing those toxins into our system. So we want to make sure we're supporting that detoxification. We want to support our immune system and our nervous system. And we want to make sure that we've got that multivitamin mineral in place. And then also we want something that's going to support the adrenal, the energy, and the blood sugar, and full spectrum. And I mean, you know, full spectrum antioxidant support, including the master antioxidant N-acetylcysteine, which is a precursor to glutathione.
Right. And when you say spectrum, I've explained it this way. It's kind of like a rainbow.
Exactly.
For example, when you look at vitamin E, for example, for a long time, it was D-alpha. Mm-hmm. So on your vitamin E, you want to see D, and you want to see a little A.
Yep.
See a little L, it stands for lousy. Don't go there. So, but they thought that the D-alpha was like the main thing, and it is the most important, but as the research came out, there was the beta, the delta, and the gamma E, and it turned out that the gamma E, and I'm pointing my finger, wasn't like super powerful, but very important in the prevention of colon cancer, for example. Mm-hmm. So the brand partner we use has always included the entire spectrum, not just the one that seemed to make the most sense at the time.
Right, right. And I can tell you stories, you know, I had clients on certain products, and I would call these companies and say, you know, why is this ingredient in the product? What is this? And I had one company, oh my gosh, if I'd have been the FDA, they'd have been in big trouble. I finally got hold of, they didn't have a medical affairs department. They had one doctor on staff. When he finally got back to me, I asked him this question, and he said, oh, that. He laughed, and he said, yeah, that's just the marketing department. They'll put anything in there. And I'm going, wow.
And how is he affiliated with a company that would do that?
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, natural approaches to gut health, and we have all of these other targeted solutions that we can use based on what the personal needs of the individual is, as that unique bio individual. So, that's it.
That is fabulous. We had somebody wanted to know if they can get this information from you because they really wanted it, and we talked about reversing diabetes with fruits and vegetables, but I think it takes just a little bit more than that. I mean, I think there's this idea that, and we see this a lot online. Sometimes I rail against it, but we all think that these very, very complicated problems, and they are complicated, there's just like one simple solution that we're all missing. And our bodies are a little more complex than that. I'm not trying to say that the solutions necessarily have to be complex, but we have this tendency to look for the one thing we have to do. So it becomes apple cider vinegar for everything, or
And
so, what would you suggest to? How would people? Maybe they. How does somebody contact you? How does somebody work with somebody with like you? Because you were, they call you, make an appointment. How does that work? How does somebody?
Yeah, I mean the connection, right? And we do a thorough health history. To try and figure out the more thorough, we've talked about our history back when we were children. That's all important when we're trying to put all these pieces of the puzzle together. So we do that extensive health history, and then we kind of take it from there.
And can I ask you, how does working with a holistic health practitioner like yourself differ from working with say a naturopath or a chiropractor or a nutritionist? I mean, would somebody have to have like somebody like all of that? Do you fill multiple roles? Can you help us out with that? Because for many people, this would be, and for me it would be too, an entirely new concept.
Well, understand that the chiropractor and the naturopath, those are both doctors. They're going to be able to, that's beyond my scope for some of the things I can't prescribe or treat. What I can do is help people to work through whatever problems they are. Like, say for instance, I was working for a medical practice, and one of the patients would be having a certain issue. The doctor could say, this person needs to implement this, and this. Please help them. And so basically, in that case, I'd be using the doctor's permission and following his directions in the implementation of the plan.
Okay. But, do you do any diagnosing or anything? So somebody comes to you and they've got all these kind of crazy symptoms, and you say, oh, looks like adrenal fatigue, let's run a test? Or how do you do that?
So basically, if they can get the testing, I've got a client right now that's working on the similar situation I am. We know with leaky gut that people can get a comprehensive stool test. They're pretty expensive. And if we have those tests, then we can work from there. Otherwise, I work through symptomology, and we say, okay, so it probably is. Let's try some things, and if it makes it a little bit better, then we'll keep heading down that path. But as far as diagnosing health conditions, yeah, that's not within my scope.
That's outside of your scope. Okay, I hope that kind of helped clarify that. And I really am so grateful that you came, because I think this level of science is really exciting to me. My daughter, we're nerds though in our family, and so we kind of, but you know what, like a lot of families, we were one of those that had brain health issues, generalized anxiety, lots of different things. And it wasn't until we began the business I started, that we started getting answers and started noticing radical health changes, health improvements, the good kind of radical health changes.
Right.
And then we realized, well, why did that happen? And we were hearing these kinds of pieces.
Yep. It's exciting when you can put that together.
Exciting. So how do people contact you, Debbie?
I guess through you.
Okay. I'll put her contact information out there. What other kinds of topics do you talk on? Are you primarily focused on gut-brain health?
That's a big focus, just because I've done so much of it. I did have a lady with lupus. She'd been to all of her docs, and it just wasn't coming together for the final stages of that. So she was reacting to every kind of food under the sun. So we eliminated the ones that she couldn't have, and there wasn't much she could. So she wasn't getting the nutrition. So we ended up doing a rotation diet. So she was getting those pieces in, and not throwing out all those inflammatory cytokines like we talked about. But yeah, I mean, so, and just working from the root and seeing where we can go.
Right. When people are doing these therapeutic diets, and I look at some of these, and they kind of boggle my imagination. They're eliminating entire food groups. I understand if you've got a sensitivity. We mentioned celiac a lot because I think that's the most obvious one to a lot of us, or lactose. You can't drink milk. Okay, well, that's fine. Some people think dairy is optional. But I look at a lot of these diets, and to me, they're trying to achieve a goal the hard way. Some of these diets really feel to me like they're really trying to go after something in a very, very difficult way, and they're not sustainable in the long term.
Right. And some of them shouldn't be done in the long term. They're just meant to be a short term type of thing. Yeah. I had a friend who had a very serious lung issue, and her naturopath put her on a 6 months raw vegan. Saved her life, but you can't live on that because you need some other things, and some of the compounds that aren't, that you need in fruits and vegetables are sometimes found when it's cooked, not just when it's raw. True.
And then the proteins and so forth. So I'm scrolling here. If you guys have any questions, like I said, there's about a 20-second delay. If you guys have any questions, post them now. And I'm scrolling through. Getting a lot of gratitude for you and what you've shared. Real appreciation for what you've put out there. And Debbie, you absolutely rocked. You've been awesome.
Oh, thank you.
So thank you very much. I'm going to just stop the recording now. And